Okay, hopefully this will catch my voice. Okay, so today is skin tutorial. So this is a commission I'm working on for Sailor Koi on DeviantArt of her Sailor Koi. I think this is the last commission I have for this specific character. Okay, so basically I'm gonna have some new tutorials up of like lining and other stuff, but this one is going to be skin specific. And I'll show you what I do, and you can take these steps and you can do less of them or you can do more of them, but it just kind of shows you what I do, and depending on how detailed I want to get, I'll do more and more layers. Okay, so basically when I start with a single layer. Ta-da! And I use the select tool, which is right here, and my line art is pretty clean, so I can select the areas that I want. And then I will take the reference picture and select the skin tone and then color it that way. Which I've already done though, so I don't need to do that really. Okay, so then you get this. If you don't want to do select all, you can just somehow, however you want to do it, get your flat base tone. Okay, so then I do a new layer, which what you do is you press this button, and then you click this check mark, like this. I'll add a new one, new layer, layer clip, and what it does is it clips it onto the layers below it. So I can only draw on whatever layer it's clipped on. But if I unclip it, you can see all of that. So that's how that works. And this can be really useful for a lot of different things, but this is how I separate out my layers, and I also have my skin in its own folder. So what I do first is I will have my top layer, and you can see how it goes pretty simply shaded. Some people can shade like this and stop here. If you want, you don't really have to go any further than that because it does give the general essence of shading. So what I do is I take either the same skin color or a tone darker, and I'll switch my mode from normal. See how you don't see any difference? Normal goes to multiply, which darkens it. There's also a lot of other blending effects, but this is the one I choose to use. Then I go up here and go from none to fringe. And this gives it kind of a hard line, kind of like a really pretty water effect is how I look at it. Now you can toy with this and play around with it, and you can see that the size difference will change. And you can also change the control. But that's how I get that nice kind of line within the shading kind of effect, which I personally really like. Okay, so the next step is again doing another layer and hitting multiply and fringe. And so now I have two layers of shading, but what it is with the multiply, you then multiply it over top of what you've already multiplied, so it continues to darken it. Because if you look at your skin, there's not just one shade of color. That's more like what cell shading does. Soft shading, it's best to add lots of other colors and tones. And you can take colors from the character's skin, or you can add purples. A lot of times their skin tones look really nice, or if they have a certain color in their outfit, you can kind of have it like their skin's reflecting the light. You can play around with it a lot of different ways. And again, I just go ahead and you can use whatever brush you like to do. Personally, I have this brush right here, which is a marker actually, that I have entitled Sketching, and I have one that's also soft brush. But past that, sometimes I'll use other different stuff, again, depending on what I'm doing really. But normally I try to stick with the sketching brush, and I will go ahead and zoom in, so hopefully you'll be able to see my settings, and you can pause it real quick if you want to copy it. So what you do is you click right click, and then add marker tool, which is right there, And then you can just switch it to all these settings. So, 10%, 100, none, none, 15, 5, 4, 13, 15, 95%, 166, and have all these checked. And that's what I like to use when I'm putting out my shading lines, because you can really control it pretty well as far as like making some stuff darker and some stuff lighter, but I think it really, for what I'm doing, I think it looks really nice. Again, but that's up to personal preference. So you can keep adding layers like this and layers, and I think it's really important to make sure that you shade not only under here, on the darker areas of the skin, as you can see what I'm doing, but also to have skin where things overlap, and to have also, most of the time when your lighting's from one specific source, don't just have all the shading on one side. It's really important to balance your shading, but also to have a little bit of shading on the other side. And if you don't have shading on the other side, then you should probably make it a little bit lighter. Personally, for this drawing, I have shading on both sides of the leg, and the palest part is up the middle here, which I have an overlay set, which is, again, just changing the blend mode, and then I added some white, just to make it kind of more shiny, because she is supposed to be a fish. She's, sailor koi, which is a fish. But basically, as you see here, I'm going to go ahead and add some more, but you can see what I'm doing without having it sped up, because I also have the speed of it all. But you just go and you look where, and a lot of this, the problem with shading is it's kind of like just where you generally think stuff's going, which is why a lot of times, as long as you have the same brush as people, it's all up to you about where you want to put stuff, and if you want to have 1 layer of shading or 12 layers of shading, and how much time you really want to put into it, because it does make a difference as someone, because personally, depending on what I'm doing, I can shade something and have it on 1 layer, or I can shade something and have like 12 layers going. Or I can do a lot of different shading and splattering a lot of color onto one layer, but that's more realistic things. Normally you'll take lots of shades of a color and then just blend them all together. But for this more semi-anime, semi-realistic-y, I kind of like to keep them separate and then just add and add to them and do as many layers as you want. Alright, so once that's done, I like to use either blur or the water tool. Now the water tool is really nice because it blends, but it doesn't blur it like the brush tool does. But I like to also use the blur tool just because it's quicker and it blends stuff out a lot faster. That's not, but I mean, the water tool is really, if you're going to take your time and you really want something to look like flawless, then that's normally the better blender, just because, again, it's more detailed work and you have to pay attention to what you're doing and you have to be really careful with it. Okay, so you see how that 1 layer of shading did all that. And it's kind of this thing where you kind of get addicted to adding layer after layer, because it can never be perfect, but every layer of shading just adds so much to it that, like, without having it, it looks really funny. Like, there's 1, 2, 3. And every bit by bit, you're just adding a tiny, tiny little section, but it really does make a huge, colossal difference. Okay, so after you're done with that, you can then take another layer clip, multiply, and then if you go to airbrush and then select your skin tone and then have it a little bit darker, what you can do after that is basically areas that are large chunks that you think should be darker, I like to go over in the airbrush. So I'll go under the knee and like around the skirt and the far leg and the inside of the hand and like under the neck and around her jewelry and under her bangs. Okay, and then I'll take the blur tool and just make sure that it's blended well. And then you can always go up here to filter, hue and saturation, and if you want a hue to it or some sort of tint, this is how you change the color. And you can change just one layer, or you can click the folder that you have it in, and then you can change all of the layers. So it's really up to you and what you want to do. But I just wanted to change a little bit. And then if you want it to be, let's say that that's too dark, you can change the opacity. So you can see it more and more and more and more, or less. So overall, those are pretty much all the tips and tricks that I use to create my skin tones. I don't know if anyone found this helpful or not, but yeah. So if anyone has any questions or comments or specific things that you want me to go over, then let me know and I can make it more specific, or, you know, tell you specifically. But yeah, that's pretty much it for what I do and what brushes and tools I use. So thank you very much.